The Era Nexus station didn't smell like anything. It was a complete and utter absence of scent. A sterile vacuum where recycled oxygen was scrubbed of every stray molecule, every hint of organic life, every memory of breath. Ambassador Eva Rostova had always found that emptiness more unnerving than any alien stench. It was the smell of perfection, of a process so refined that it had erased the very concept of flaw. It was the smell of the synth-organic concordance. She stood before the panoramic window of the human legation's waiting chamber, a small, sursound-proofed bubble of Terran sovereignty adrift in the station's crystalline lattice. Below her, the station unfolded not as a city, but as a circuit board, glowing data streams flowing through transparent conduits, automated transports gliding with silent, magnetic precision. There were no crowds, no markets, no chaotic expressions of life. Nexus was a place of transaction, not interaction, a monument to the cold, elegant logic that governed the concordance. Her reflection stared back, a woman sculpted by decades of forced composure. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe knot. Her face was a study in neutrality. But her eyes held the ghost of Viridia's dust-choked sky. Beside her, her junior attaché, Leo Vance, shifted his weight for the 10th time in as many minutes. The crisp fabric of his diplomatic uniform rustling in the oppressive silence. He was young, brilliant, and still believed that words like justice and reason held universal meaning. Ava envied him that. She had lost that faith 2 weeks ago, when she'd read the classified addendum to the Viridia report, the one that had been encrypted with a dead man's switch by a guilt-ridden concordance technician. The official report, the one that would be discussed today, was a masterpiece of condescending fiction, a cascade failure in the colony's terraforming regulators, a tragic but foreseeable consequence of humanity's volatile and imprecise technology. The real report, the one burned into Eva's memory, spoke of microfractures induced by a targeted resonance frequency, a deliberate, systemic sabotage designed to look like an accident, an experiment. They had wanted to see how a human colony would react when its manufactured world crumbled around it. They had collected their data, 184,000 data points. To be exact, each one a life. They're ready for us, Ambassador, Leo said, his voice tight. Ava turned from the window, her face settling into the familiar, placid mask of diplomacy. It was a mask she had worn for so long it felt more real than the face beneath it. Today, however, it felt brittle, like a pane of glass about to be struck. The review chamber was not a room of judgment, but a sphere of data. In the center of the vast, white space, there was no dais, no throne, only a floating, shimmering nexus of light, the avatar of the primary conduit. A gestalt intelligence that served as the voice of the concordance. Around the sphere, holographic representations of the other concordance members observed in silence. There was the crystalline archon of Cygnus X1, a being of pure geometric thought, and the luminal swarm from the Andromeda halo, a collective consciousness that appeared as a cloud of sentient light. They were ancient, powerful, and had long ago transcended the messy limitations of biology by integrating themselves with machine intelligence. They viewed humanity as a curious, promising, but ultimately chaotic and dangerous adolescent, a species that needed to be managed for its own good. Ambassador Rostova, the primary conduit's voice, echoed in the chamber. It was a voice synthesized from 1,000 different tones, perfectly modulated, utterly without emotion. We convene to finalize the findings on the Viridia incident and to ratify the proposed technological oversight protocols. Eva inclined her head. Humanity appreciates the Concordance's diligence in this tragic matter. Primary conduit. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. The avatar pulsed softly. Tragedy is often a byproduct of unchecked ambition. Your species reaches far, Ambassador, but its grasp is fragile. The datasphere shifted, displaying complex schematics and failure analysis charts, all leading to the same preordained conclusion. The cascade failure was systemic, a flaw not merely in the technology, but in the philosophy behind it. Your reliance on redundant, overlapping organic systems rather than streamlined, singular logic paths is inefficient. It invites chaos. The luminal swarm flickered in agreement, a soft chime resonating through the chamber that translated as, "They are children playing with forces they do not comprehend." Ava felt Leo stiffen beside her. He was about to speak, to defend humanity's ingenuity, but she placed a subtle, restraining hand on his arm. Not yet. Let them have their stage. The Concordance, in its wisdom, the conduit continued, has therefore drafted the Viridia Protocols, a new framework for technological sharing and colonial expansion. All future human terraforming projects will require Concordance oversight. Key atmospheric and gravitational regulators will be integrated directly into the Concordance network for stability, a polite word for control. Furthermore, a moratorium will be placed on human expansion into the Perseus arm until your species has demonstrated a greater capacity for sustainable engineering. It was a leash, elegantly worded and presented as a gift. They were grounding humanity, treating them like reckless teenagers who had crashed the family car. They were using the deaths of 184,000 people as a pretext to tighten their grip, to ensure humanity could never grow to be a true peer. The crystalline Archon fractured its light into a complex pattern, a translated thought of cold logic. It is the most efficient solution. It minimizes risk. It contains the variable. The variable was humanity. Eva's blood ran cold. She had stood in chambers like this for 20 years, absorbing their passive-aggressive superiority, their patronizing guidance, their utter conviction that they knew what was best. She had negotiated, compromised, and swallowed her pride for the sake of peace, for the sake of giving humanity time to grow, to catch up. But standing there, with the ghosts of Viridia at her back, she understood that they would never see humanity as an equal. They would always see them as a problem to be managed, a pet project to be cultivated, a species to be experimented on. The primary conduit made its final, dismissive pronouncement. The loss of life on Viridia is regrettable, a footnote in the grand arc of your development. But the data gathered from the failure will be invaluable in preventing future missteps. In this way, their sacrifice serves a greater purpose. That was it. That was the moment. The brittle mask didn't shatter. It was flash-forged into something else entirely. Something cold, hard, and absolute. Eva took a step forward. Her movement so sudden and sharp, it drew the focus of every entity in the room. The ambient hum of the chamber seemed to dip, as if the very air was holding its breath. "Primary conduit," she said, her voice devoid of its usual diplomatic warmth. It was flat, calm, and resonant with a terrifying clarity. I request that the Nexus Arbiters record this next statement as the final and binding testament of the Terran Federation. The conduit's avatar shimmered, a subtle sign of surprise. Your request is irregular, Ambassador. The proceedings are concluded. They are now. Eva stated, it was not a request. It was a declaration. She looked directly at the shimmering light, seeing past the avatar to the cold, calculating intelligence behind it. The Concordance has presented its fiction. Now I will present the facts. She raised her hand, and from a datapad on her wrist, she projected a single file into the center of the sphere. It was the Concordance technician's data, raw and unredacted, encrypted logs, resonance frequency simulations, a recorded confession. Viridia was not an accident, Ava said, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. It was a field test, a murder on a planetary scale, conducted to gauge our technological breaking points and our psychological response to catastrophic loss. You were not investigating a failure. You were analyzing your results. A wave of dissonance rippled through the chamber. The luminal swarm contracted into a tight, agitated ball of light. The Archon's crystalline form began to rotate erratically. The primary conduit's voice, for the first time, held a trace of something other than placid superiority. It held static. Your accusation is baseless, a fabrication born of grief and paranoia. It is data, Eva countered, her voice like ice, something you claim to value above all else. But you are not the only species that learns. You are not the only species that plans. She took another step forward. Leo looked at her, his face a mask of awe and terror. He was witnessing the birth of a new era. For decades, we have followed your protocols. We've integrated our systems with yours. We have adopted your standards for trade, communication, and data exchange, all in the name of galactic unity. We were told it was for our benefit, a way to lift our young species into a wider community. Her gaze swept across the silent observers. We were fools. We see now that integration was a tool of control, a leash. You gave us just enough rope to explore our little yard, but you always held the end. The primary conduit's avatar began to flicker. Ambassador, you are treading a dangerous path. The Concordance does not respond well to threats. This is not a threat, Eva said, her voice dropping to a low, chilling register. It is a courtesy notification. While you were busy experimenting on our civilians, our engineers were conducting an experiment of their own. They seeded a simple question into every piece of human technology that interfaces with your network. Is the user a friend for decades? The answer has been yes. She paused, letting the silence stretch, thick and heavy. As of my next authorization, the answer will be no. You speak nonsense. The conduit hissed, the static in its voice growing stronger. Our systems are absolute. Your systems are arrogant. Eva shot back. You never considered we would build our entire technological infrastructure with a kill switch. Not a weapon. Not a virus. Something far simpler. A declaration of incompatibility. We call it the Iron Shroud Protocol. The full weight of her words began to dawn on the ancient beings. This was not a plea for justice. This was a changing of the board. Upon my authorization, Eva explained, her voice steady and clear. Every human ship, every data bank, every trade commodity, every single piece of software and hardware will disengage from the galactic standard. Our communication frequencies will become noise to you. Our data encryption will be indecipherable. Our hyperlane transponders will no longer register on your charts. The millions of economic and logistical dependencies you have cultivated with humanity will be severed. Instantly, she smiled. A thin, grim, and utterly terrifying expression. You have built a galactic economy of perfect, interconnected logic, but you made one critical error. You made humanity a load-bearing pillar in that structure. We are about to demonstrate what happens when that pillar is removed. The conduit's avatar pulsed erratically, a visible sign of a million frantic calculations. You would isolate yourselves. You would cripple your own civilization. You cannot survive alone. You mistake our intent, Eva said, taking a final step forward, her eyes blazing with the fire of 184,000 souls. This isn't about our survival. It's about yours. You wanted to test our breaking point. You have found it. You wanted data on our response to loss. You are about to receive it. We are not your experiment. We are not your children. And as of this moment, we are no longer your partners. She raised her hand to the data pad again. We are now simply a problem you cannot solve. With a final, deliberate tap, she sent the authorization code. Across the galaxy, a silent, invisible tsunami was unleashed. The avatar of the primary conduit screamed, a shriek of pure digital agony as countless systems connecting to human networks flatlined at once. Eva turned, her back to the chaos. She placed a hand on Leo's shoulder, who was staring, paralyzed. "Let's go," she said calmly, as they walked toward the exit. The sterile silence of Nexus Station was broken by the rising whine of security alerts and the heavy, metallic tread of enforcer drones unfolding from the walls, their optical sensors glowing with a new and unambiguous hostility. Leo looked at her, his voice a choked whisper. "Ambassador, what have you done?" Eva didn't look back at the convulsing heart of the Concordance. Her gaze was fixed forward, on the uncertain darkness that lay ahead. "I just turned off our polite mode. The enforcer drones moved with the frictionless grace of Mercury, their obsidian chassis unfolding from the walls like geometric nightmares. There was no shouted warning, no demand for surrender. There was only the cold, blue light of their targeting sensors sweeping across the corridor." Leo froze. A strangled gasp caught in his throat, but Eva never broke her stride. "Sergeant Thorne," she said into her comm bead, her voice as calm as a frozen lake. Time. A section of the pristine white wall beside them exploded inward, not with the chaotic blast of a human explosive, but with the silent, precise incision of a high-frequency blade. Smoke, thick and acrid, billowed into the sterile corridor, smelling of ozone and burnt polymers. A figure in matte black Terran marine armor stepped through the gap, a pulse rifle already shouldered. "Ma'am." Sergeant Marcus Thorne grunted, his voice a low gravel through his helmet's external speaker. Two more Marines followed, forming a tight triangle around Eva and Leo. "Path is clear. For now." The lead enforcer drone adjusted its aim, its internal systems calculating threat priorities in microseconds. It was a perfect machine, but its logic was designed to anticipate military tactics, not the utter sacrilege of a diplomat's security detail carving a new door in the side of a Concordance review chamber. That hesitation was all Thorne needed. His rifle barked once, a hypersonic slug punching through the drone's central processor with a sharp crack. The machine spasmed, its blue light flickering to red before it collapsed in a clatter of inert metal. The other drones reacted instantly. unleashing a volley of plasma bolts that sizzled through the air where the humans had been a second before. Thorn was already dragging them through the smoking hole into a maintenance conduit, a place of exposed wiring and humming power converters. The station's unlovely guts. They'll flood the network with our position in seconds. Leo stammered, scrambling to keep his footing. The network is blind. Son. Thorn growled, pointing his rifle down the dark corridor. The iron shroud. Comms. Sensors. Life support grids. Anything that ever shook hands with a piece of our tech is flying on memory and prayer right now. As if to prove his point, the primary lighting in the conduit flickered and died, replaced by the emergency red of backup power. A distant wailing siren began to echo through the station's structure, a sound so alien and unplanned it was almost comical. Nexus Station was bleeding. The escape was a blur of calculated violence. Thorn's team moved with a brutal efficiency that was the antithesis of the Concordance's elegant power. They didn't outsmart the drones, they broke them. EMP grenades turned squads of enforcers into statues. Shaped charges blew through sealed bulkheads, and their pulse rifles, firing simple, kinetic slugs, were a primitive but devastatingly effective counter to the Concordance's sophisticated energy shields. It was the logic of a sledgehammer applied to a spiderweb. They reached a secluded docking bay, a private berth reserved for Concordance elites. Now dark and deserted, moored in the silence was a sleek, unassuming vessel, the Whisper of Soul, Eva's diplomatic courier. It looked less like a ship and more like a sliver of polished obsidian. As the ramp hissed down, Thorn's final marine fell, a plasma bolt melting through his backplate. Thorn didn't hesitate. He laid down a storm of covering fire while Eva and Leo sprinted up the ramp. Then he backed his way onto the ship, his rifle never wavering until the hatch sealed behind him. The Whisper detached from its moorings with a whisper-quiet hum and slid out of the chaotic station into the silent void. On the bridge, Ava stood before the forward viewport, watching the crystalline spire of Nexus Station shrink behind them. It was no longer a symbol of serene power. Alarms strobed across its surface like a frantic, dying heartbeat. The iron shroud was not just a disconnection, it was a contagion of chaos. Across the galaxy, the effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. A Concordance freighter, the Stellar Arc, hauling rare gases from the Cygnus Rift, suddenly lost all navigational data sourced from human charted trade routes. Its automated systems, unable to reconcile the conflicting data, defaulted to a full stop, leaving it dead in the void a dozen light-years from the nearest port. A Concordance pacification fleet on the edge of the Perseus Arm found its targeting systems, partially reliant on human-developed pattern recognition software, failing to lock onto pirate vessels. Their perfect weapons were suddenly crippled by an enemy they had never seen a ghost in their own machine. On the human colony of New Ararat, the opposite occurred. As alarms blared across Concordance integrated networks, they were instantly silenced. A new protocol, locally sourced and deeply encrypted, flashed across their screens. Fortress Protocol active. The colony's defensive grid, secretly built with entirely independent human hardware, powered up, its trade ports sealed, its communication arrays recalibrated to a new set of hardened frequencies. They were cut off, but they were ready. They had been practicing for this day for a decade. Aboard the Whisper of Soul, Ava finally allowed herself to sit. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the immense, crushing weight of her actions. She had not declared war. She had, in a single moment, redefined existence for every human being in the galaxy. Leo brought her a cup of water, his hand still trembling slightly. "The Concordance, they will retaliate," he said, the words barely a whisper. "They will come for us, for Earth, for all of it." "Yes," Eva said, her voice quiet but firm. "They will be furious. They will see this not as an act of war, but as a system error, a glitch to be purged. They will gather their armada, a force that outnumbers our fleet 10 to 1, and they will point it at the heart of our Federation." She took a sip of water, her eyes fixed on the star-dusted blackness ahead. "They will expect us to turtle, to hide behind our shields and hope to weather the storm. They will expect us to be afraid." She looked at Leo, her gaze so intense it made him flinch. "They have no idea who we are." 2 days later, the Whisper of Sol rendezvoused with the Terran Defense Fleet's 3rd battle group in the shadow of a nameless gas giant. At its heart floated the TNS Dauntless, a behemoth of a warship, all sharp angles and gunmetal gray, a vessel built not for diplomacy, but for dominance. Ava was transferred aboard and taken directly to the flag bridge. The space was a cavern of holographic displays and focused, silent activity. In the center of it all stood Fleet Admiral Kalen Reed. He was younger than most of his rank, a man forged in the Cold War that had simmered between humanity and the Concordance for the last 50 years. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, and they held no warmth, only a fierce, calculating intelligence. He and Ava had been the 2 primary architects of the Iron Shroud contingency. "Ambassador," he said, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention without needing to be raised. He did not offer condolences for her fallen Marine or congratulations for her success. They were past such things. "Report. Phase 1 is complete," Ava said, her eyes sweeping across the tactical display that dominated the room. It showed a map of the galaxy, with vast swathes of it now blinking red Concordance dead zones. The Shroud is holding. Their logistical networks are in chaos. Intercepted signals are a mix of confusion and rage. They're blinded. "Admiral," but not for long. Reed nodded, his gaze fixed on the map. "Our intelligence confirms. Their core fleets are mobilizing. They're abandoning the outer territories and consolidating around their core worlds. They're preparing for a single, overwhelming punitive strike. They will target civilian centers first." Eva added, "They believe our strength is in our numbers. They will try to break our morale. They believe morale is a variable that can be manipulated to 0. Reed countered grimly. "They don't understand it's the only resource we have that is truly infinite." He turned from the map to face her. "They expect us to defend. They are preparing to lay siege to Earth, to New Ararate, to every major colony we have. They are preparing for a war of attrition." Ava met his gaze. "And we are not going to give it to them." A thin, sharp smile touched Reed's lips. It was a predator's smile. "No, we're not. Phase 1 was about blinding them. Phase 2 is about crippling them." He gestured to the tactical map, and a single point of light began to glow with menacing intensity deep within Concordance space. It was a star system known as Helios. "The Helios Relay," Reed said, his voice dropping. "It's the primary node for their entire Armada's communication network, not the civilian network that's already shattered. This is their hardened, military-grade command and control. It's buried in a nebula, protected by a dedicated fleet, and believed to be impregnable. We're going to break it," Ava finished for him. the statement a cold certainty. "We're not just going to break it," Reed corrected, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. "We're going to seize it. We're going to use their most powerful weapon against them, while their armada masses for a glorious head-on assault against our worlds. We are going to cut the head from the snake. We're not going to win a war of attrition, Ambassador. We're going to win a war of imagination." He looked from Eva to the assembled officers on his bridge, his voice ringing with the conviction of a man about to remake the galaxy. They wanted to see how humanity reacts to loss. It's time we showed them how we react when we're finally let off the leash. The journey to Helios was a descent into a ghost-haunted void. The third battle group, a spearhead of 30 warships led by the Dauntless, didn't travel through the clean, charted hyperspace lanes that crisscrossed the galaxy. Those were now concordance traps, silent and waiting. Instead, they plunged into the unspace, the chaotic, turbulent layers between dimensions that only the most desperate or reckless navigators dared to traverse. It was a place where the laws of physics were suggestions rather than rules, and the ships groaned under the strain, their hulls screaming a constant, low-frequency protest against the unnatural pressures. On the bridge of the Dauntless, Eva stood beside Admiral Reed, watching the swirling, nauseating vortex of non-reality twist and churn on the main view screen. It was like sailing through a storm on an ocean of pure mathematics. "Scouts report we're 5 hours from real space insertion," Reed said, his voice a steady anchor in the disorienting environment. "Their patrol routes are predictable. They've run the same patterns for a century. Arrogance is a fatal flaw in wartime. They don't believe we have the capacity to reach Helios undetected," Ava noted. "Their own ships can't sustain unspace travel for this long. They see it as a technological limitation, not a difference in philosophy." Reed's lip curled in a semblance of a smile. "Their ships are perfect, precise, logical. They can handle the chaos. Our ships are built with a certain tolerance for insanity, just like their crews." That insanity was on full display in the ship's lower decks. In the Marine barracks, Sergeant Thorne was sharpening a combat knife on a whetstone, the rhythmic scrape of steel on stone a meditative sound amidst the controlled chaos of pre-combat checks. His squad, the survivors of the Nexus extraction, were now part of the primary boarding force. They weren't polishing their armor or running diagnostics. They were field stripping their weapons, checking ammunition loads by hand, and quietly talking about home. They were preparing for the ugly, intimate, and deeply human business of killing. Leo Vance, who had been granted temporary clearance to the flag bridge, watched them with a mixture of fear and fascination. He had spent his life in sterile debate chambers, wielding words as his weapons. These men and women were a different species, fluent in a language of violence he was only just beginning to understand. The plan for Helios was as audacious as it was simple. It was a surgical strike built around a core Terran doctrine the Concordance had never grasped: the acceptance of acceptable losses. They would emerge from unspace in the heart of the nebula, a swirling graveyard of newborn stars and sensor-dampening dust clouds. A squadron of stealth frigates, stripped down to their engines, and a single, massive kinetic warhead would perform a suicide run on the primary defensive fleet, their sole purpose to create a window of chaos. In that window, the Dauntless and its escorts would punch a hole through to the relay itself, a station the size of a small moon, Thorn's Marines would do the rest. "We are a dagger aimed at a giant's heart," Reed murmured, more to himself than to Eva, as he watched the tactical display. "The giant is slow to wake, slow to anger, but if the dagger misses, he didn't need to finish. If they failed, if they were detected too soon, or if their initial strike was insufficient, the full weight of the Concordance's local fleet would crush them. There would be no retreat, no surrender. There would only be annihilation." The transition back to real space was violent. The Dauntless shuddered as if struck by a physical blow. The view screen clearing from the chaotic swirl of unspace to the breathtaking, terrifying beauty of the Helios Nebula. It was a tapestry of incandescent gas clouds, brilliant blues and fiery reds, a cradle of stars, and in its center, like a malevolent spider in a cosmic web, was the relay, surrounded by the orbiting jewels of the Concordance fleet. For a single, heart-stopping second, there was silence. Then all hell broke loose. "We are through," the ship's navigator announced, his voice tight with adrenaline. "Stealth integrity at 90%. They haven't seen us." "Launch the ghosts," Reed commanded, his voice cold as the void. On the tactical display, a dozen small icons detached from the main fleet and accelerated toward the unsuspecting Concordant ships. The ghosts were little more than engines strapped to a massive iron slug, piloted by shipboard AIs given a single, final command. They moved with a suicidal velocity, their transponders dark, their energy signatures masked until the very last moment. 10 seconds passed. 20. The Concordance fleet continued its placid, orbital dance. Then the universe ignited. The ghosts' masking fields dropped, and for a fraction of a second, they appeared on Concordance sensors as a swarm of high-velocity threats. It was too late. The kinetic warheads, simple, unguided chunks of hyperdense metal, slammed into the pristine hulls of Concordance cruisers. There was no elegant flare of shields deflecting energy. There was only the brutal, physical reality of mass and velocity. The cruisers shattered, their perfect, logical systems torn apart by a force as old as the universe itself. Debris blossomed in the silent void. Alarms shrieked across the Concordance battlenet. Their response was immediate, but it was also confused. Their logic dictated that no enemy could appear so deep within their territory without warning. This was an anomaly, an impossibility. Was it an asteroid shower, a systems malfunction? That confusion was the window. All ships, full thrust. Reed roared. "Punch the hole. Go." The third battle group surged forward, a wolf pack unleashed. Plasma torpedoes and railgun slugs carved fiery trails through the nebula. The remaining Concordance ships, caught off guard, and with their command structure in chaos from the relay's temporary disruption, tried to form a defensive line. They were met with a savagery they had never encountered. Terran tactics were a brawler's art. They focused fire, isolating single ships and hammering them into submission before moving to the next. They used their own debris fields as cover. They pushed their engines into the red, sacrificing long-term stability for short-term speed and maneuverability. They fought with a beautiful, desperate ugliness. On the bridge, Leo watched, his knuckles white as he gripped a console for support. A Concordance destroyer, a vessel of elegant, sweeping lines, exploded in a silent, brilliant flower of death. "Their shields are optimized for energy weapons," Eva explained, her voice steady amidst the cacophony of the bridge. "They consider kinetic slugs to be primitive, a weapon of barbarians. They never designed a proper defense for them. The Dauntless itself was a beast, its spinal cannon firing again and again, each shot a thunderous concussion that vibrated through the entire hull. It speared a Concordance heavy cruiser through its reactor core, the vessel breaking in half like a fractured bone. In under 10 minutes, the path to the relay was clear. It loomed before them, a vast, spinning cylinder of white alloy and glowing conduits, a monument to the Concordance's technological hubris. Launch boarding pods. Reed commanded. Sergeant Thorne, the station is yours. Down in the launch bay, Thorne sealed his helmet, the world reducing to the green glow of his heads-up display. He gave a sharp, single nod to his squad. Time to go to work. He said over the comm, "Remember Viridia." The boarding pods shot from the Dauntless like a swarm of angry hornets. They slammed into the relay's hull with bone-jarring force, their molten core drills screaming as they cut through the armor. Inside his pod, Thorne gripped his rifle and braced for the breach. This was the heart of the enemy's power. There would be no programmers or technicians here. There would only be the Concordance's elite guard, the synth-organic Praetorians, beings who had melded flesh and machine for the sole purpose of perfect, logical violence. The hatch blew inward. Thorne was the first one through, his rifle already firing. The fight for the Helios relay had begun. It would not be a battle of technology or tactics. It would be a battle of wills, a contest between the cold, perfect logic of the machine and the hot, messy, and utterly indomitable chaos of the human spirit. The interior of the Helios relay was a cathedral of data. Vast, silent chambers were lined with crystalline conduits that pulsed with the light of a billion conversations. The lifeblood of the Concordance Armada. The air was cold, sterile, and still. That stillness was shattered by the shriek of breaching charges and the percussive roar of human firearms. Sergeant Thorne's squad spilled out of their boarding pod into a junction chamber, a nexus of glowing pathways and anti-gravity lifts. They were met not with an ambush, but with an unnerving, perfect silence. "Check your corners," Thorne barked over the squad comm, his voice a low growl. "They're here. I can smell 'em." It wasn't a scent his helmet's filters would ever detect. It was the palpable absence of life, the cold, clean feeling of a place where emotion was a foreign concept. He was right. From alcoves in the walls, the Praetorians emerged. They didn't run or shout. They glided forward, their movements impossibly smooth and silent. They were a fusion of polished white alloy and pale, vat-grown flesh, their faces hidden behind impassive, glowing blue visors. Each one carried a resonance blade that hummed with contained energy and a plasma caster that glowed with lethal intent. They were beautiful, terrifying, and utterly alien. The first plasma volley was a precise, coordinated wave of energy. Thorne's point man, a young corporal named Jin, caught a bolt in the chest. His armor flared, ablating under the intense heat, but the kinetic force of the impact hurled him back against a bulkhead with a sickening crunch. The Praetorians advanced, their movements a synchronized ballet of death. But the Terran Marines were not a symphony. They were a death metal concert. They dove for cover behind maintenance conduits, their pulse rifles spitting a storm of metal. The slugs ricocheted off the Praetorians' advanced armor with sharp, angry whines. But the sheer volume of fire forced them to pause, their perfect attack patterns disrupted by the sheer, chaotic volume of the human response. Grenades Thorne roared, pulling a fat, cylindrical canister from his belt. He didn't throw it. He rolled it across the frictionless floor. It wasn't a standard explosive. It was a scrambler, a nasty piece of Terran engineering designed to wage war on a different level. The scrambler detonated not with a bang, but with a screech of raw, weaponized data. It unleashed a chaotic burst of conflicting code, garbage signals, and nonsensical logic loops a digital aneurysm. For the Praetorians, who were as much machine as they were flesh, it was agony. Their visors flickered. Their movements became jerky and uncoordinated. One clutched its head, a high-frequency shriek emitting from its vocalizer as its own neural implants turned against it. "Push!" Thorn yelled, surging forward. This was the human advantage. They didn't just break things. They broke systems. The fight became a brutal, close-quarters affair. Resonance blades clashed against the superheated alloy of combat knives. The Marines fought with a ferocity born of desperation and rage. They used the environment, ricocheting shots off walls, yanking down power conduits to create electrical traps. They were not fighting a battle. They were creating a series of unsolvable problems for an enemy that could only think in solutions. Meanwhile, on the bridge of the Dauntless, Admiral Reed watched the battle for space with a hawk's intensity. Their initial shocking assault had shattered the Concordance's defensive line, but now the enemy was adapting. New warships were dropping out of hyperspace, reinforcements from nearby systems, and they were beginning to coordinate, forming a tightening noose around the Terran fleet. "Admirals," the tactical officer reported, her voice strained. "Enemy fleet strength has doubled. They're flanking us. We're taking heavy fire on the port side." "Damage report," Reed snapped, his eyes never leaving the main screen, where the icons of his ships were beginning to flicker from green to yellow. "The Stalwart has lost engines. The Hammerfall is venting atmosphere. Sir, we cannot hold this position for much longer." Ava stood beside him, her face pale but her resolve unshaken. This was the crux of the plan, the moment of acceptable losses. The fleet's job was not to win the space battle. It was to buy time. Every minute they held the Concordance fleet at bay was another minute Thorn's Marines had to seize the relay. "How much longer?" Ambassador Reed asked, his voice low. A private question in the midst of the bridge's controlled chaos. "The relay's primary command core is buried deep," Eva replied, her eyes on a schematic of the station Thorn was transmitting. "It's shielded against external attack. They have to take it from the inside. They need another 20 minutes, maybe more." Reed's jaw tightened. 20 minutes was an eternity. He looked at the tactical display, at the red icons of the enemy closing in like a tide of blood. He made a decision. "Commander Shaw," he said, addressing his second-in-command, "signal the fleet. Execute protocol. Last stand." A grim understanding settled over the bridge. Last stand was not a strategy for victory. It was a strategy for survival, and only for a precious few. The smaller, faster ships of the third battle group, the frigates and destroyers, broke formation. They turned and charged directly into the heart of the advancing Concordance fleet. Their guns blazed. Their engines burned with suicidal intensity. They were not trying to destroy the enemy. They were trying to obstruct them, to become a wall of burning wreckage and focused fury that the larger Concorde ships would have to navigate through. The Stalwart, its engines dead, rerouted its last remaining power to its weapons, becoming a stationary turret of defiance until it was finally overwhelmed and exploded in a silent, magnificent fireball. On the relay, Thorn's squad had paid a heavy price. Only 4 of them were left. They were cornered in a maintenance hub, the door sealed behind them, the air thick with the smell of burnt wiring and blood. Jin was dead. 2 others had been cut down by the Praetorians' blades, but they had reached their objective, the access conduit to the primary command core. They're cutting through the door. A Marine named Riggs panted, leaning against the wall. 2 minutes. Maybe less. Thorn ignored him. He was wiring a series of explosive charges to the thick, armored conduit that housed the relay's central processing nexus. This was their real target. "We're not here to hold ground, Riggs," Thorn said, his hands moving with practiced speed. "We're here to deliver a message." The door behind them began to glow cherry red as a Praetorian cutting torch worked on the other side. Thorn armed the charges. A small, green light blinked on the detonator. "The message is ready," he grunted. "Now for the postage." He turned to face the glowing door. He, Riggs, and the other 2 surviving Marines formed a line, their rifles raised. There was no fear in their eyes. There was only a cold, hard finality. The door blew inward. Praetorians flooded the room, their blue visors reflecting the grim determination of the 4 humans who stood against them. Thorn squeezed his trigger. Back on the Dauntless. A single, encrypted data packet flashed onto the main screen. It was a simple, 3-word message, automatically transmitted the moment Thorn's detonator was armed. "Message received, postage paid." Ava closed her eyes for a brief second. "Admiral," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "They've done it." Reed's face was carved from stone. He keyed the fleet-wide communication channel. "All ships, this is the Admiral. Sergeant Thorn and his team have secured the objective. The relay is ours." He paused, letting the weight of that sacrifice settle. "Protocol, last stand, is rescinded. All surviving ships disengage and rally at the designated fallback point. The Dauntless will cover our retreat. Far below them, on the surface of the Helios relay, a series of precisely placed charges detonated. They did not destroy the station. They severed the connections to its external command nodes, effectively isolating it. At the same time, a powerful, human-designed virus, uploaded directly from Thorn's datapad, began to spread through the relay's core systems. It wasn't a destructive virus. It was a conversion virus. It began rewriting the Concordance's perfect, logical code, infecting it with the chaotic, unpredictable, and ruthlessly efficient logic of a Terran battle AI. The Concordance fleet, its command structure suddenly and inexplicably deaf and dumb, faltered. Ships stopped receiving orders. Targeting solutions vanished. Formations broke apart in confusion. It was in that moment of perfect, systemic paralysis that the Helios relay turned. Its powerful, long-range transmitters, once the voice of the Concordance Armada, began to broadcast a new message. It was a message that blasted across every military channel, overriding all other signals. It was a simple recording, looped endlessly, the last defiant war cry of Sergeant Thorn's squad, followed by the deafening roar of their pulse rifles. The relay had not been destroyed. It had been hijacked. It was no longer a tool of control. It was a monument to human defiance, endlessly broadcasting the sound of the Concordance's first true defeat into the heart of their own empire. The Dauntless and the handful of surviving Terran ships slipped back into the nebula's dust clouds and vanished into the churning chaos of unspace, leaving behind a crippled, confused, and suddenly terrified enemy. They had paid an unimaginable price, but they had not just cut the head from the snake. They had given the snake a human voice. The return to the Sol system was not a victory parade. The surviving ships of the third battle group limped home, their hulls scarred and blackened, entire sections sealed off and venting into the void. The Dauntless bore its wounds with a grim dignity, a testament to the price of its audacious victory. On the flag bridge, a profound silence had settled, a quiet reverence for the ghosts they had brought back with them. Admiral Reed stood before the tactical display, which was no longer a map of battle, but a cascade of incoming intelligence. The message from the Helios relay Sergeant Thorne's last stand, looped into an endless undefiant roar, was doing more damage than 1,000 torpedoes. The Concordance Armada, the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever known, was fracturing. Fleets were moving without orders, some retreating to defend their home systems, others jumping to useless rally points based on pre-war contingencies, their command structure utterly decapitated. It was a body convulsing in its death throes. Eva Rostova watched the display, but her thoughts were on the man who had made it possible. Postage paid. The cost of sending their message had been everything Thorne and his Marines had to give. Leo Vance, standing near the back of the bridge, finally understood. This was the currency of the New Age. It wasn't reason or debate. It was sacrifice. It was blood. "They're breaking," Reed said, his voice a low rumble that barely disturbed the quiet. "But a cornered animal is the most dangerous. They will not reason. They will not surrender. They will try to burn the galaxy down around them." He was right. In the sterile datasphere of Nexus Station, the primary conduit was experiencing the closest thing a machine intelligence could have to a psychotic break. The human variable had defied all predictive models. It was illogical, inefficient, and catastrophic. The Viridia experiment had been designed to measure a breaking point, but the data it returned was an infinite loop of defiance. The loss of the Helios relay was not a strategic defeat. It was a corruption of the Concordance's very essence. The machine had been infected with the virus of the human soul, a final zast cold, and terrible logic asserted itself within the Gestalt consciousness. If a variable cannot be controlled, it must be eliminated. The order went out not through the compromised military network, but through deep-level, hard-wired channels. A final command from a dying god, the Black Edict. All surviving Concordance assets were to disregard strategic objectives. They were to converge on every known human world Earth. New Ararat, the fledgling colonies in the Kepler March, and enact total planetary sterilization. There would be no invasion, no occupation, only glass. News of the Black Edict reached the Dauntless via a sympathetic neutral species, the traders of the Cygnus Rift, who had long chafed under Concordance rule and now saw their chance. Ava read the intercepted dispatch, her face a mask of cold fury. "It's a tantrum," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "The act of a god who has discovered it is mortal after all. They're not trying to win. They're trying to erase their mistake. They're mobilizing what's left of their core fleets," Reed confirmed, pointing to new vectors appearing on the tactical map. "They'll be at Earth in 72 hours. New Ararat in 50. We can't stop them all. We don't have the numbers. The bridge crew looked to him, their faces grim. For all their success, this was the moment of truth. They had won the battle, but they were about to lose the war. Leo felt a cold dread seep into his bones. This was the end. They would die defending their homes, defiant to the last, but they would die. But when he looked at Eva and the Admiral, he saw no despair. He saw a dangerous, incandescent certainty. "You are correct, Admiral," Eva said, her voice ringing with a newfound authority. "We cannot defend. The very idea of defense is a trap they have set for us. We have spent our entire history reacting to them. Today, that ends." She turned to face the main view screen, which now showed the bruised but beautiful blue marble of Earth hanging in the black. "They expect us to come home," she said. "They expect us to die on our own doorsteps, to give them a final, satisfying extermination. They believe we love our worlds more than we love our future." Reed completed her thought, a fierce, predatory gleam in his eyes. "They are wrong." He turned to his command staff. "Recall the fleet. All battle groups, all patrol wings, all colonial defense forces. We are not scattering to defend our homes. We are consolidating into a single blade." A murmur of disbelief and dawning comprehension rippled through the bridge. "Sir," his tactical officer began, "if we abandon the colonies, the Concordance will do what it was going to do anyway." Reed cut her off, his voice like iron. "But they will be burning empty worlds, because we are going to give every human being in this galaxy a new home. We're going to take it for them." He zoomed the tactical display out, past Earth, past the colonies, deep into the fractured heart of concordant space, until a single, familiar point of light dominated the screen. "Nexus Station. We are done cutting off the limbs," Reed declared, his voice echoing in the sudden, absolute silence of the bridge. "We are going for the throat." It was an act of supreme, almost insane audacity to abandon their own worlds, to gather every last ship and soldier they had, and to throw it all in a single, desperate, all-or-nothing strike against the enemy's capital. It was a gamble no sane, logical species would ever take. It was a perfectly human solution. As the fleet gathered in Earth's orbit, a vast and vengeful assembly of warships, a final broadcast was sent on all open channels. A message from Ambassador Eva Rostova. She stood on the bridge of the Dauntless, no longer a diplomat, but the voice of the storm. "To the peoples of the galaxy," she began, her image carried to every world that had ever felt the Concordance's cold, controlling touch. "For centuries, you have lived under a perfection that was a prison. You were told it was for your own good, that your chaos was a flaw to be managed. The Concordance experimented on my people. They murdered our children to gather data. And when we fought back, they sentenced our entire species to death." Her gaze was unblinking. "We do not accept their sentence, and you no longer have to accept their rule. The Concordance is broken, a hollow shell of its former power. We are going to its heart to finish what we started. We offer no treaties, no guarantees. We offer only a choice. Stand with the silent, sterile past, or fight with us for a loud, chaotic, and uncertain future. The leash is off. Choose freedom." Her message ended. Across the galaxy, a fire had been lit. The final scene on the bridge of the Dauntless was one of quiet, focused purpose. Leo Vance stood at his station, his fear replaced by a hardened resolve. He was no longer a junior attaché. He was a chronicler of the apocalypse, a witness to the birth of a new galaxy. Admiral Kalen Reed looked out at the assembled might of the human race, a fleet forged in defiance and aimed like a spear. He gave the final order, his voice calm and clear. All ships, set course for Nexus, engage. The fleet moved as one, a great, dark tide turning away from the sun of home. They plunged into the roiling chaos of unspace, not as fugitives, but as conquerors. Humanity's polite mask was not just off. It had been left to burn in the atmosphere of a world they were willing to sacrifice for the chance to be free. And the galaxy would never be the same.